making this bright and happy birthday card to celebrate my birthday, which is at the end of May. So I'm going to start out with some die cut balloons. I've got the largest and the middle size cut out of some white cardstock, and I'm going to do some ink blending using the Hillside stencils. So I'm basically making a warm colored balloon and a cool colored balloon. So I've picked out 4 ink colors here. I'm starting with Candied Apple, and I'm just holding that stencil in place with a little piece of washi tape on the back of the balloon. And between each color, I'm just wiping off the stencil, cleaning my mat, and making sure my brush is cleaned off by rubbing it on my chamois. Then I'm going to move on to the next color, which is Abandoned Coral. Then I'm going to move on to Carved Pumpkin for my orange. And of course, when you do this, I am pulling the ink up off the stencil onto the balloon so that it's darker at the edge of the stencil and lighter at the top. And then finally, I'm going to use mustard seed at the bottom, which I don't need the stencil for this, so I'm going to take my tape off and just add the mustard seed along the bottom. But even though I don't have a stencil, I am going to make sure that I ink it from the bottom up so that it has the same gradient of very saturated up towards white where the colors change. Now to move on to the large balloon, I've got 4 inks here. Actually, I ended up doing 5 in the end just because I wanted my stripes to be spaced similarly to the small balloon. I'm starting with Twisted Citron for the top. And I am varying the hills that I use. So you can see this one I'm using the more simple hill, and on this one I'm using the one that's a little more wavy. And I am trying to vary like where the dips, the valleys and the hills go. So when I move down to the next line, I will make sure that they are not lined up the same so that you have more interest and more variety in the wavy lines that we're creating here. So the second color was Lucky Clover. This third color is Mermaid Lagoon. And then here's where I added in the 5th color. So I pulled out my blueprint sketch just to have a transition between that Mermaid Lagoon and then the purple that's going to be at the bottom. And I really think that this made it look really nice. I love this color. It's one of my favorites. And then finally, I'll have the Wilted Violet at the bottom. Again, working at the bottom and pulling it up just like I would had there be a stencil here. So I've got the largest outside in stitched rectangle cut from white cardstock, and I'm going to use the stitched bouncy trails to create a background. So I want my balloons to be the focus, so I'm just adding some texture to this background panel with these stitched bouncy trails. I think they look like clouds when you use them this way and just create a little interest to the background. So I'm just running that through my die cut machine, and you can see that it just leaves the stitching detail. It doesn't actually cut a line. Now to work on the sentiment, I'm using the big Scripty Words for the word birthday, and then I'm going to use this happy in the happy, happy, happy add-on set. And I'm just using some scrap pieces of cardstock, so I'm going to white emboss the happy onto this piece of storm cloud cardstock, just using my clear ink and white embossing powder, and then I'm just going to heat that up with a heat tool. And then the reason I picked these sentiments is because they have dies that match them, so I can easily cut them out. So I'm just going to line up the coordinating die and run that through my die cut machine. Now for the word birthday, I'm using the big Scripty Words, and I'm using a piece of narwhal cardstock. I'm doing the same thing in white embossing. So I'm going to have variety in the font of the sentiment that I have on the card, as well as the cardstock colors that I'm using. So now that I've got that stamped out with the embossing powder, I'm just going to heat it up with my heat tool. And then of course these have coordinating dies as well that will cut out that Scripty word, which just looks so cool when they're cut out. So now that I've got my sentiment words cut out, you can see how this is all going to kind of lay out on this card panel that I've got here. And I'm going to work on my balloons a little bit. So I'm going to add strings. Now this die set does come with strings that you can cut out of cardstock, but I thought it would be fun to add a little bit of texture and add some actual twine. So I've just got some black twine here, and I'm taping it to the back of the balloon just with a piece of washi tape. And then I'm just going to trim the end off. So here's my string. And then I'm going to take another piece of that twine and tie a bow around that little tail at the bottom of the balloon, like the string is tied onto the balloon. So this just adds some extra interest by using twine. My string kept curling up on me, so that's why I put the washi tape there to hold it down while I tied my bow. And actually, I find that if I tie a bow upside down, it actually ends up right side up, which is kind of strange. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, so that's why I flipped my balloon upside down and tied my bow upside down. For whatever reason, when I do this, my tails end up in the right direction. So I'm going to do the same thing to the smaller balloons so that they match. And then I've just added some liquid glue to the back of this big one, and I'm going to place it up towards the top left corner of my panel. You can see that it's partly hanging off. Some of that will get trimmed off in the end. And then I'm going to add some foam squares to the back of the smaller one so that they have some dimension from each other. And then I'm just going to layer that one over the big one, going off the right side of this card panel. Also making sure that that bow that I tied does not get stuck underneath. So now that these are in place, I can take the strings and I'm just going to pull them to the bottom and around to the back, and I'm just going to secure them with some washi tape on the back of the panel. So I'm going to use 2 pieces just to make sure that they stay in place. But once this panel is glued down to the card base, these aren't going to go anywhere. And then I'll just trim off the excess. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my sentiment. So I'm starting with the word birthday, and I'm going to put that towards the bottom. It's going to overlap the strings, and I'm just using liquid glue to put that down. I'm going to use my tweezers so I don't make a big mess. But I want that to be kind of placed to the left side, and then I'm going to trim off the little tail that's on that far left end, so it kind of looks like it goes off the panel. Now I'm going to use some thin foam squares and pop up the word happy right above the birthday. And make sure that's tucked in behind that little bow tail that's hanging down there. Now that I've got all the pieces on my panel, I'm just going to cover the back with some foam tape here, and I'm going to mount it to my card base. And I'm using a piece of fog cardstock for my card base so that it's slightly different than the white. It gives it a really subtle frame, and it kind of goes with the grays that I used on my sentiment. And then finally I decided to add a few clear sequins just for some shine. And I actually forgot to cut my balloons off originally, but I'm just going to trim them off next to the card. So it is kind of a nice look because they kind of flow over that mat of the card base all the way to the edge of the card. And here is my finished birthday card. It's bright and happy and would make anyone smile. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.